Well, good morning, lovely people. You folks are legends. I want to put that on record and thank you for everything that you do to keep our criminal justice system going, as well as, of course, the family courts. And thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak at your AGM and conference. It's a pleasure to welcome you to my hometown of Eastbourne, which, despite the weather, I promise is officially the sunniest town in the UK. And in fact, the first time I gave a speech on this very stage was at my school prom. And so I'm delighted to have moved on to more pressing matters than deciding who is prom king and queen. But whilst I am from the place where the sun shines, I'm all too familiar, as I know you are, with where the shadows are cast. And so I'll set the scene with some of those. I'll set the scene with why I personally care, before I come specifically to the system that needs reforming for the benefit of those who work within it, for the benefit of our communities who stand to benefit from it, and of course from the benefit of victims and survivors who deserve that reform too. So from running out of prison spaces to overcrowded estates and to understaffed probation services and courts with waiting lists stretching years into the future, our system is at breaking point. We all know that. And I've seen this up close, having built a criminal justice organisation myself, a social enterprise. Over a decade ago, I moved from Eastbourne to the East End of London, where I supported ex-gang members and young ex-offenders away from crime and into employment. And I was at first volunteering as a youth worker in Poplar, very near to Canary Wharf. And I distinctly remember a young person I was working with saying to me, "Josh, I don't want to deal drugs, I don't want to steal bikes, but I do it so I can use the cash I make to secretly slip into my mum's handbag week after week to help her pay the bills." And it really hit home that these are often young people whose hearts, whose aspirations are in the right place, but their means for pursuing those are not, and their perceived opportunities for pursuing those do not seem to exist for them at all. And so I wanted to do my bit to empower the likes of those young people who had had upbringings that were not dissimilar to mine. Home wasn't always safe when I was growing up, and the same went for many of them. And so I wanted to try to help address some of the cycles of reoffending that weigh so deeply on our criminal justice system, with 80% of people who are incarcerated being re-offenders. And so I set up a social enterprise that trained and employed those young people to repair smashed smartphone screens. 29% of people have a smashed smartphone screen. And I will give 29% of you my card before the morning is out. And the average person swipes, scrolls, or taps on their device 2,617 times a day. And what was very clear is that the young people I was working with were looking for instant gratification. In fact, many of them referred to it as something called the now game, which I think is a song lyric, the idea that they wanted to see the fruits of their labour quite quickly. And lots of young people are advised or pigeonholed into certain opportunities, whether it's bricklaying or horticulture or painting and decorating, which are fantastic trades and work for so many young people. But for so many people, that isn't what they're interested in. but it was very clear that technology was a trade that many of the folks I was working with were interested in. And so the phone repair dream began. The problem was I had no interest in phone repair, and I didn't know how to do it. So YouTube became my best friend. And we ended up running pop-up repair clinics in large workplaces across London, going in to the likes of Barclays, Lloyds Bank, the US Embassy under Donald Trump, and much more. And what we're able to do is not only provide opportunities for young people with criminal convictions to be able to make money in a positive way, but we are able to help break down the barriers between the community and between people with convictions. We're able to show the talent, the motivation, the commitment, and the humanity that lies behind the conviction, with a view to encouraging those folks back into society, to a life with reduced or indeed no re-offending, where they can contribute positively again. And it ultimately made very clear to me, that work, that so many people can work their way out of the criminal justice system. They can set themselves on the right path if we give them the tools and the chance. And so this is a message that I've shouted about a lot as a Member of Parliament, especially during my time as Justice spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats. And in particular, I've been shouting a lot about domestic abuse. As I said, when I was growing up, home wasn't always safe for me. And I became particularly concerned in light of that experience of domestic abuse that myself and my family experienced when the SDS 40 scheme kicked in last year, in the midst of prisons that were bursting at the seams, with fewer than 100 places left in the men's prison estate at one point. And the government said at that point, we will exclude domestic abusers from early release, which is very important for all sorts of reasons. Particularly the respite that many survivors need to be able to process the trauma and start the journey to recover from their abuse. But the problem was, the government had no means to exclude domestic abusers from its early release scheme. And the reason being that you all know that many domestic abusers are convicted of things like battery, ABH, and the rest, exactly the same kind of offences that could apply to strangers who have a brawl in a pub, and no way on paper of distinguishing formally. And so I asked the government, how many domestic abusers are in prison at the moment? How many domestic abusers are in the community? And they said, almost word for word, it is not possible to calculate the number of domestic abusers in prison because there is no specific offence of domestic abuse in the law. And so I said, well, let's create one. And so months and months and months of campaigning, working alongside victims and survivors in particular, came to push the government to address this. The government has a big aim, an important one, to halve violence against women and girls over the next decade. But how can you possibly do that when you're not measuring one of the most prolific forms of violence against women and girls, domestic abuse? How are the likes of our probation officers meant to manage that risk in the community if it's not formally logged in the criminal justice system? Of course, there are the domestic abuse flags that police use, but we know that from force to force they're applied inconsistently. In fact, within forces they're applied inconsistently. And so with more and more pushing, the government finally caved. And the then Justice Secretary stood up in the House of Commons, looked at me and said, the Honourable Member for Eastbourne has been campaigning for some time to better identify domestic abusers within the criminal justice system. And she said that in light of that campaign, which, as I said, involved many victims and survivors across the country, the government is finally set to introduce the first domestic abuse flag in the law, so that at sentencing, when judges are passing a sentence and already consider whether domestic abuse should aggravate the sentence, they formally place down that flag so that we can properly manage those offenders, whether being excluded from an early release scheme, and even more importantly, ensuring that probation officers have that formal information there and then to help manage that risk. And so some folks say, and I get the banter from time to time, what's the point of the Liberal Democrats? You're the third party, you're not in government, is there anything you can do? Well, this example proves how working collaboratively with the government, pushing them constructively but firmly, and sharing one's own personal experience together with harnessing the experiences of other brave survivors who speak up, can compel action, and I will keep fighting for that to ensure that all in the criminal justice system, yourselves included, get the support that is needed. So that is one key reform secured. And that is some of my story and why I'm so passionate about reforming our criminal justice system. But I'm here with you now because I want to honour you as the ones doing the work on the front line day in, day out. And I want to recognise the immense risks that you and your colleagues face every single day. If I take probation specifically, how shocked I was to see the news that a probation officer in July was attacked at the Pavilion's offices in Preston. And I think it's this Sunday that the perpetrator's due to be sentenced. I think probation officers are in so many ways the unsung heroes of our criminal justice system, the Cinderella of our criminal justice system that gets on quietly without looking for the limelight, but all too often are left behind. And these types of attacks that I've just referred to are an affront to the criminal justice system as a whole. They are an affront to our democracy, and we cannot, though, accept that kind of risk just as part of the job. That is not good enough. So all of us in Parliament and the government ministers, government more widely, have a responsibility to hear you, to protect you, and to ensure that you have the resources to do your job safely. That needs to be a fundamental priority and not an afterthought. And that brings me to the sentencing bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. And this is what includes that domestic abuse identifier at sentencing that I fought for. Because the safety question and the capacity question are two sides of the same coin. Now, I welcome the principle of a shift towards reasonable and proportionate community sentences. We know that the reoffending rate in the community for many offences is much better, much lower than it is for folks who are in prison. When they're done properly, community sentences can rebuild trust, can give people the structure and support that they need to get on with their lives and keep out of criminality and stop this cycle of crime before it starts again. But short sentences, all too often, are not tough on crime. 58% of offenders, depending on which stats you look at, go on to reoffend if they've served a short sentence. And they're all too often expensive, they're all too often ineffective, and they all too often make reoffending more likely, not less. There are some exceptions. But what works is supporting people through, for example, employment and mentoring programs, as you all know. What works is helping people build lives worth living outside the prison walls. Most people who go to prison are going to end up in the community again. And so the question that we have to reckon with as a society is, what kind of citizen do we want them to be on release? Do we want them to reoffend again, or do we want them to operate positively at the core of our society? And so I think it's important that politicians answer that kind of question honestly and in good faith, and do not use the criminal justice system or indeed the family court system as a political football. Rehabilitation takes time, it takes patience, it takes the right support. And it's not a soundbite or a headline, it's a sustained commitment to helping people change. And we all know that it's not a one-way street either. I've lost count, and I'm sure you have, of the number of folks with convictions I've worked with and that you've worked with, where people take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes many more steps back before going forward. Relapse is a thing, and it takes patience. It takes months, it takes years, it can take much longer. But none of that can work if the people delivering it, folks like you on the ground, don't have the time or the resources to make that rehabilitation happen. And the principles mean little if the people delivering them don't have what they need to make them work. And so the probation service, for example, is being asked to do more and more, to supervise more, to rehabilitate more, to manage more complex cases in the community. And yet it's doing so often with fewer staff, higher caseloads, and morale stretched to breaking point. And ministers will, I'm sure, point again to the government's pledge of £700 million to enhance probation capacity. And look, I'm not going to critique more cash that goes into the probation service. But folks, we need to see the details. Money announced is not the same as money delivered. And so how will that headline figure resolve the reality that there's a shortfall of more than 2,300 full-time probation officers expected by next spring, precisely when the government's new measures to move more into the community are due to come into force? And documents seen by the BBC, for example, show a shortfall of around 10,000 probation staff needed to manage offenders serving sentences in the community. Well, if that gap isn't filled, then what happens? More pressure on already exhausted probation officers, more risks materialising, more danger for both staff, the public, and of course victims and survivors. The numbers must add up before government progresses. And the recruitment and retention crisis in probation and the family courts didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the predictable result of years of decisions that have undervalued your profession. Now, the government made a manifesto promise to conduct a full review of probation and its governance, and that promise must be kept. And I can say to you that on behalf of my party, the Liberal Democrats, we will continue to hold the government's feet to the fire on that commitment. But it's not just the government who needs to be kept in check. There are also private operators in this space who must be held in check. And the first in my sights have been Serco, whose management Serco's management of the tagging contract has been absolutely abysmal. And what I find extraordinary and sad about it in many respects is that when challenged why, for example, they're conducting visits to homes where the offender isn't there, or the address is incorrect, or whatever it might be. All too often, I have heard Serco pin the blame on probation for providing the wrong information. And all too often, I've been out with some of the team. It is down to systemic issues within Serco, within their IT systems, the way in which they cut corners with a view to making big money that is the cause of this problem. And so I've asked the government numerous times in the House of Commons and elsewhere, how many times has Serco been fined for failing to deliver on the contract? What is the value of those fines? And I asked the Minister at the Select Committee about a month ago, at what point will you accept that we need to start looking elsewhere and stop polishing a turd? And so I will keep making that argument using all sorts of language, parliamentary and non-parliamentary. But it's really critical that if we have private operators working in this space, that they are not taking taxpayers for granted. They are not taking probation officers for granted. They are not taking victims and survivors for granted. And if and when they are, for all the reasons I've described hitherto, I take that very personally and not on my watch. There's more that needs to be done. The family court system is in a mess in so many respects, and I've been alarmed, particularly when thinking about domestic abuse, with the ways in which abusers consistently seem to use the family court to continue perpetrating their abuse, and there's lots more that needs reform. I've attempted to put forward proposals in Parliament to amend certain pieces of government legislation to reform the family court system. And the government's come back and said, computer says no, that's out of scope of this bill, not good enough. What I've went on to do is ask the Deputy Prime Minister, the new Justice Secretary, just a few weeks ago, if he will take this even more seriously. And if he will not be able to use existing legislation that's been committed to reform the family court system, then will he urge the Prime Minister in the next King's speech to announce that the government will legislate for family court reform? And the Justice Secretary said that he would seek to do what he could in this Parliament or in this session to try and do something about it, and if not, then he would be prepared to come forward with those reforms and with legislation, which is the first time I have heard the government explicitly commit to legislating for that. So that is a win, and you folks at Napo need to be ready, together with myself and many others, to feed into that process, to make sure that the opportunity for once-in-a-generation family court reforms move in a way that brings families together, that supports families rather than undermines families, undermines women and children particularly, who are using our family court system to achieve safety, to achieve sanctuary, and to achieve justice. So to conclude, what I learned in the East End a decade ago and from there still holds true today. That people can turn their lives around when they're given the right support, but that does not materialize out of thin air. It comes from highly skilled professionals like you doing difficult work, often in very challenging circumstances. And so the question facing the government is simple. Are they serious about making community sentences work, or are they just shifting the problem from overcrowded prisons to overwhelmed probation? You deserve better than warm words and underfunded policies, and the communities that you serve deserve a probation service that's properly resourced to keep them safe. Liberal Democrats will fight for that. I will very personally fight for that, and I know that you will fight for that too. So thank you again, seriously, sincerely for the work that you do. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for coming to Eastbourne, and thank you for continuing to fight for a criminal justice system that delivers just that, justice.